Is there a difference between building stakeholder relations and strategically building stakeholder relationships? Well, that's the conversation that myself and Lyto had during this episode. So here's what you can expect over the next half hour, 45 minutes.
High performing team, because people try to over engineer it, whether it's culture, whether it's the process, the ATS. I think it really boils down to if recruiters really love their job and if they understand that the end goal is to serve both their candidates, right, and make sure that these candidates fit with the company at the company's present stage, right, that's an even bigger success. So with that mindset, I think we have the very good basis for a recruitment team to be really successful and also happy. Yes, happy people are successful people. But the word strategic, I think, confuses a lot of people because they think strategy is quite complicated. I don't think it is. It's kind of, what do I want to achieve? In this case, in recruitment, is hiring good people for the company. How do I do that? By making a hiring manager trust me, and hopefully by the end of the process, it's going to be enjoyable for them as well. And this is part of being strategic with your process without over-engineering it.
Although departing the talent acquisition space, Lyto comes from many years of working as both an internal and an external recruiter. She's phenomenal in her approach of building relationships from stakeholders, for hiring managers, to candidates, to employees and colleagues. This is really one of those conversations, and I've said it before, grab your notepad, get your notes on your phone, sit down wherever. A lot of information is going to be flying at you. Not necessarily always in the most structured manner, but there is nuggets of information here. Information that's going to take you and your relationships with your stakeholders to the next level. I guarantee it. So thank you for joining. And again, looking forward to hearing the comments about how you got on with this episode. Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by a recruiting and HR business partner with a decade of experience under her belt, with nearly 5 years spent in one of Europe's fastest growing and most dynamic fintech scale-ups. Known for her humanistic approach, she's been praised as a true leader by those that she's guided, fostering not only personal growth of the individual, but also a strong sense of belonging and motivation. But how did she get to this point? How does she ensure that she created the right environment for all of her stakeholders, whether that's hiring managers, applicants, or her direct reports? So the answer for this lies in strategically building stakeholder relations. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcome today's guest, people business partner at Quanto, Lyto Linardi. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, like I said, from that introduction, I actually took a snippet of one of those, one of the recommendations I saw on your LinkedIn. I think I mentioned it to you, but I think it really shows a testament of somebody when people are writing things. But it does, if people are writing things like that, it shows you more than what you write about yourself. I love reading them because it really starts kind of peeling back who people are. We have on our LinkedIn, this is what I want everyone to think about me, but when someone writes something nice about you, it makes life a lot easier to kind of work out who you are behind your own words. But the topic of strategic relations and things like that, we'll dive into for sure. But I like to start all of these podcasts off with a very similar question, just icebreaker, as it were. So from your perspective, what do you think makes a high-performing recruitment team in the current market?
Fair enough. For me, a high-performing team, because people try to over-engineer it, whether it's culture, whether it's the process, the ATS. I think it really boils down to if recruiters really love their job and if they understand that the end goal is to serve both their candidates, right, and make sure that these candidates fit with the company at the company's present stage, right, where they are at their growth, let's say, curve, and hopefully if the candidate can be there for the next couple, 2-3 years, that's an even bigger success. So with that mindset, I think we have the very good basis for a recruitment team to be really successful and also happy. Yes, happy people are successful people.
I think it's also, I think we pre-recording, we had conversation. One of the elements you said was about not overcomplicating what our jobs are. I'm sure we'll touch upon that again a little bit later, but I think that is pretty much in a nutshell. What I like about your answer is that you talk about recruitment. I know it sounds bizarre, but a lot of times when I talk to talent teams and we're talking about recruitment, they bring in all these different elements. Like the crux of our job is great people for the job at the time, and you do that
Yeah,
repeatedly, you're a successful team. And then you overlay the other parts on top, but you never forget what the core is.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also being true to who you are. Like there's simple ethics that you need to have as a person to be a recruiter, and these ethics really sort of, and when people say I've had a bad experience with a recruiter or a good experience with a recruiter, so if I remember my recruitment days, I probably made 1,000 mistakes. Like who doesn't? But there's one thing that always remained the same. I treat people with the respect that they deserve, and I also always take into consideration that interviewing, changing jobs is not easy. It's a stressful process, and giving feedback to everyone timely and the right feedback in the way that they're going to receive it is one way to build relationships with any stakeholders, right? Because if the candidate is not ready now, they might be in a year. And if you've moved companies, they might be able to be a good fit for the next company. And so are stakeholders, right? You need to know who to give feedback to when, while remaining ethical enough to know that, hey, I cannot leave that person to go out of the process without knowing at least a couple of actionable uh, um, items they can take with them and maybe improve in their next interview process. And trust me, they never forget you. And one of the keys, for me at least, to being a good recruiter is people remembering you. So when you go back and knock on their door in like 6 months, it's like, hey, it's you again. I'm willing to speak to you just to have at least an exploratory call because you never know what will come out of it.
I've noticed that part, that remembering aspect. I think I drilled it into myself quite early on. My name is very unique, and having a boy called Eden makes it even more unique. And then couple that with I focus in Berlin tech, there is not a single Eden out there that I'm yet to find that does Berlin tech recruitment. That's a boy, right? So I'm a one for one, for good and bad. And I've always said this to people: is like I'm like Marmite. You're either going to love me or hate me. If you love me, you'll work with me again. If you hate me, you never will. I mean, it's fine. I can understand that, but that element of being rememberable. You can't get away
Yeah.
from it. I think my name makes it a little bit easier.
Definitely. And that's when recruiters, if they bring their personality into the whole aspect, and, I see so many times, and especially that mostly comes from the demands of the business or the stakeholders, you need to go with a prepared sheet of 10 questions that you ask back to back with all the candidates. You sort of lose your personality into that and
Yeah.
you're not memorable. And that's I think, one of the reasons why recruitment has such a big drop off, because people do get emotionally burned out when they speak to people again and again and again, because you know how many interviews you need to do to get one hire, right? And especially if you have multiple roles open, that can be quite demanding. And if you remove your personality from it, it really can lead to you not enjoying what you do anymore. And if you're really not enjoying it, then you're not going to be successful. Or you might close the roles, but at the end of the day, you might have churn after 6 months. So for me, that's again one of the success metrics that I like to use. So passing probation period. And why would you want to be in an unhappy situation? And I think a lot of recruiters, and it comes with age and time spent recruiting, that you sort of need to find, yes, a structured way to do your interviews while keeping your personality there and gaining something back. And this is something that recruiters forget. Every person you meet has a piece of information that you can use either for the business, so do some investigative work, right? What our competitors doing, or a knowledge cookie that you can take and implement for yourself. And that's why recruiters have an abundance of knowledge. So you're focused in tech, right? But even in tech, back end, front end, mobile, all the spectrums of what these people do, and that knowledge is just precious to have.
So at the beginning of this conversation, I said about strategically building stakeholder relations, and that was kind of the quote unquote title that we were talking about. But for those that are listening, because I'm sure people are going to say, well, yeah, I build stakeholder relationships. Of course I do. When we talk about strategically doing this, what do you actually mean?
I think the word strategically is often confusing to people because they might think that you need to, go into depths and create those plans and long-term ideas of how you're going to build this. But no, it's understanding a couple of key topics. A, who are these people? So dividing your stakeholders into groups, right? Finding the common goal that you have with them and sort of being transparent through it with the right amount of information that they need to know, right? And knowing how to use the information that you have. So, do you want to start, for example, how do you build strategic relationships with your hiring managers or your candidates? Which one do you want to go with first?
Let's go with hiring managers.
Of course, because everyone loves to hate hiring managers. So,
Disclaimer for my hiring managers listening, I like you 97% of the time. 3%
there
of the
you
time,
go.
you're a pain in my ass.
Listen, I think even that 3% of being pain in each other's ass, excuse my French, comes mostly from misalignment. So one of the things that I like to do is when I do an introduction call, let's say with a new hiring manager that doesn't know me, I never just dive into business. They need to know who I am, why am I doing this, right? And what my end goal is. And I ask them these very exploratory questions. Who are you? What are you doing in this company? What's your vision? And ask them questions about the team that they're leading or themselves and their vision that will then help me put the pieces of the puzzle together on what am I looking for the candidate. And you always ask your hiring managers, what are the core skills that you need and what are the ones that you can live without? This is, I know, a cliche question, but you knowing a lot of information about them and the team can help you bridge that gap. And then also coming to being a true business partner to your hiring manager. So they say the team is fantastic. Most recruiters would say, that's great news. Someone would be happy to join the team. And they never follow up with the question, why are you fantastic? What skills does your team have? Does this new role need to, I don't know, close a skill gap? Or what can they learn from others? And that sort of puts you in a position of being on their level because you show that you understand what you're doing, you know the business, you know the role that you're hiring for, and they understand that you're in it to win it for the long term for them, but also for the company. And this is one aspect of building relationships. I know they say HR, and I put talent acquisition in HR, so we're one big happy family. Is uh, is not for the people and for the business. No, we're the silver lining between the people and the business, and making sure we can satisfy both, which is a very tough uh, challenge, let's say, indeed, is where your end goal would be. Find the right candidate for the business, but also make sure that this candidate would be happy. So even if your hiring manager says, I love this candidate, but you have doubts whether they're going to be happy here, I'd rather stop the process and explain why. And this is the 3% of the time that, we have our, let's say, clashes. But when they know that you're doing it for the right reasons, you gain their trust. And trust is the main, for me, building block of being strategic in your relationships with your hiring managers. I hope this makes
That
sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. I really hope whoever's listening is scribbling this down or have their notes page on their phone, because that's what you've just described is perfect in my opinion. It doesn't always get to that point, let's say that, right? Sometimes hiring managers, they just don't have time and capacity for all of the information, but I think we have to try and explain to them why we need these tools and things like that. So that point of stopping the process, we do that a lot. Not because we're bad recruiters, right? But that is one of the core ends we always say to hiring managers. Say, look, you want to make an offer, I will tell you actively not to if I don't think this person is truly right for you. And I'll rather spend another month searching, because then the person you get is right. And actually, this is quite an interesting thing. If anyone who's listening does use a recruitment agency, and my hiring manager started to do it to me, which I first of all I was a bit taken back by it. And now I'm sitting there from a different perspective thinking, actually, that's a really good question. So he interviews everyone, and then he says to me, what do I think? And the first time he said it to me, I was like, well, hang about, I'm asking you the question. Like, I went in on the interviews. Went, yeah, no, I know, I've got my opinion. but what do you think about these people? What do you think about these people for us? So I send my write-ups, and obviously I speak to them again a few more times until we speak again with the hiring manager. So I give them a list of, this is the pros and cons of each person, and then we see if what I see aligns to what he sees in terms of the personality, the cultural fit. Obviously the tech stuff I can't align. But since he's been doing that, I've been a lot more focused, shall we say, in his process more than I was before, shall we say, because I know that I'm going to get questioned myself, and that's the first time in 11 years that a hiring manager has been questioning me after the process has begun. Usually, I just accept it, and then. So I thought it was quite an interesting perception.
Well, that means that he knows how to build a relationship with you, that they also value you enough to also get a second opinion, because recruitment is a team effort. And I think when it comes to transparency, so the way that you give feedback about a candidate is also extremely important. And you need to write your feedback in a way that your hiring manager, A, will read it, B, derive the information that they need to derive to start building the next questions for the next interview. And you're right, we cannot ask all candidates tech related questions. And this is something that is, for me, very important when we go and build an interview process with a hiring manager, sort of saying, I will ask those questions. No need to ask the candidate during 5 interviews, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to join this company? And this is the interview fatigue that hiring managers are not aware. Just because us as recruiters, we want to build a good relationship with our hiring managers, but we're not also always willing to sort of explain to them, hey, just so you know, going into this process, you need to check yourself, because A, bias, B, people might be tired from interviewing. They might have had a bad day. There's a lot of components going in. And I'm not saying don't trust your instinct, but if you do make a decision that you're not sure about, at least I need to be sure that you're making the right decision. So I can go back to the candidate and saying, hey, this is why it's not happening. And 99% of the times, if I'm convinced that the reason that it's not happening is good enough, I have seen zero pushback from candidates saying, oh, I think this is unfair, or a bad Glassdoor review, and everyone knows you'll hate those. So this is the relationship I like building, and it takes time, absolutely, right? So any either agencies or in-house recruiters having one recruiter, one lead for per stakeholder per se is a very good idea, because it takes a while. And then one of the things, especially for hiring managers, that we do, but I don't think we do it on a eye to eye level and business mindset, is challenge them. And it's not going into arguments with them, because I know challenging sometimes is what people are afraid to do, to sort of sit eye to eye with a C-level and say, hey, I don't think I can sell this role. Or are you sure this is the right role for your organization? Or what you're telling me is you want an 100%, and I bet you've heard that 1,000 times, a candidate that ticks all the boxes, but if we can get them
right
cheaper,
now.
even.
I've got a search like that right now. Honestly, I even said it to the team this morning. I was like, I hate admitting I cannot find someone. I hate it. It really grates me. But I said to the team this morning, like, I don't think I can find
I
this.
got it.
I've done this. I've done the search. I've done what they asked me to do, and I cannot. We're just off. We're a few degrees out, and if they're not budging, I cannot force it in. So I know exactly what you mean.
Exactly. And it's making them understand that. And this is where us internal recruiters can also take a step back, because I can alert my hiring manager, okay, this person ticks your 100% your boxes. You haven't given me what a good career projection would look for them in 2 years. So I don't know whether they're going to develop. I am alerting you that there might be a chance they might churn. And then I alert my HRBP about that as well. So transparency is key. And then even if they make a mistake, I never am critical about it. So if anyone makes a mistake in hire, everyone makes mistakes, right? So it's not about being critical. It's about learning from each other and not going with the mindset, hey, Lyto, I told you this is a bad candidate. Or, hey, ex-chief marketing officer, I told you this might be a churn risk. Is, okay, how do we learn? How does the business learn? What can we do better next time? And this sort of pushing through mindset is something that I've seen even the most senior stakeholders appreciate. That being said, if you want to add the strategic to it as a recruiter, is if you know in the back of your mind that something might go wrong and they haven't listened to you, which is fair enough, right? People don't always have to listen to you. You need to have a contingency plan by yourself. So if I think someone will churn, I'll never stop searching and have my own hidden talent pool to make sure that when the door is knocked again, like, hey, they're not performing or it's a churn, I'm like, okay, here's 15 candidates. Tell me your top priorities. I'm going to reach out to them today.
I've got the biggest
Sneaky.
smile on my face, right? Because this is literally how I recruit, like to the T. Because
Mm,
in my opinion, obviously, once someone's started, I have a small window to see how they're truly getting on. Candidates always tell me it's great. The clients never really tell me it's bad until it's like we need to replace them. Touch wood, it hasn't happened in 3 years, so we'll take that one.
that's good.
I'll take it. I'll be honest with you. I worked a lot. I mean, this is kind of off topic. I was quite crap at closing at that point before, and back in the heyday, and I don't mind admitting that. But where you have, especially in Berlin tech scene, offers going around left, right, and centre, it kind of
Yeah.
masks. And then when they're not as frequent in terms of the last 2 years, everything is super important. So that's something I had to really work on to make sure, like, and then coming back down to like pulling offers before, well, I say pulling offers, stopping offers before I go out for the right reasons. So that's something I've massively encouraged myself to work on to make sure that it doesn't kind of seep back into the old ways. So that is how we do it, because I don't think the search is done unless the contract is signed. So I'm going to keep making sure there's a pipeline done. So re-engaging
Absolutely.
new searches, even when that contract is signed, sometimes you have that feeling. You have that feeling
Yeah.
that it could be something that might go wrong here. I'm still in the same boat as that. With kind of the client side, let's say hiring manager side, clients, whatever you want to call them, that part covered. What about the candidates? So having that strategic element towards them.
That really depends because I've done both in-house and agency. There's some differences and there's some similarities. I know a good candidate in agency can be a rehire in a year or two. So you want to focus on building your relationship with them, that they trust you, that you're their recruiter. And that is the biggest, I think, success an agency or a freelancer recruiter has. People that
Yeah.
keep going back to them when it's time to move on to something better, something has gone wrong, and they trust them that they will go back to them. So and I can tell you how that happens because I've worked in recruitment on agency side. In-house, it's about treating them already as your colleagues. And that for me is one of the way that they can trust you. And then also, I think what people forget is that the candidates are not candidates, they're people. So one of the ways that, especially if I know, let's say at the end, that it's a good candidate that I want to continue the process with, my questions that I always like finishing with is, how do you want to receive feedback? Do you
Mm.
prefer being texted? Do you prefer being called? What do you prefer? What works with you? Until what time I can call you? So I show them that I appreciate who they are, how they want to continue, and I also give them some ownership. And based on that exchange as well, I can see a lot about what it would be like to work with them. So let's say someone says, yeah, you can text me about feedback and next steps, and I text them and they don't text me back for a day, right? I can get an alert in my head like, okay, maybe something happened, but it's easy to text nowadays. Hey, not available. We'll ping you tomorrow. And that slowly gets you a little bit more in-depth understanding of who are they, because skill sets, and I know a lot of, if anyone is listening from any companies, don't judge me on this, but unless we're doing something extremely technical, like, I don't know, surgery, more or less SaaS and the tech scene and the startup scene, we are all at the same level in terms of what we need in terms of skills, and those skills can easily be taught. So
Mhm.
it's understanding, and then hiring managers come back, and this is a strategic aspect for the candidates as well. Who has the potential? Who has that drive to learn and progress? And everything else will just fall into place. Now, with the candidates as well, I don't know. For me, I think it comes from within because I like people and I enjoy building relationships with them. And I know that they believe me when I say, I will guide you through the process, whatever happens. Do I suggest that to everyone? No, because if you're a person who takes things to the heart, right? Going to the end of the process with a candidate and having that relationship build, and then it doesn't happen, it just makes you sad. It does take a burden. And until you build that resiliency over the years, it can crush you. And a lot of recruiters blame themselves. It's my fault, or it's somebody's fault, but it's nobody's fault. It's business, and it's business with people, and people are unpredictable. I mean, especially if you over engineer the process where you have 9 people meeting one candidate, there's bound to be a blocker down the line.
Yeah, I think also that comes into the element of literally you just need one person who's strong enough to say no, especially if it's in a senior position and you've got some juniors and you go, well, if they say no, then maybe it is a no. They're on the fence. I've
Yeah.
seen it before. I've got one process. I'm definitely not going to say their name, but it is quite amusing. They invite the entire team to well, not the entire team. Okay, let me rephrase. The company is quite large. They invite the team of the person that they're going to join, and that team can be
Okay.
up to 18 people. Everyone gets the
Yeah.
invite. And if 18 people say, yeah, I've got time, I'll join, 18 people join the interview and they just have an open discussion, but still, then you've got 18 people to come back with your feedback. It is wild.
No,
Please,
that's
if anyone's
wild.
listening, yeah, never do
Don't do
this.
that.
I'm trying to change it. It's a slow burden. The strategic business kind of relationship side, it is a slow burden, but
I
I get
mean,
what you mean in that sense.
even if you don't change that, right? And this is where internal recruiters can do that. What you can
Yeah, we're
ask them
trying.
is, have those 18 people been trained on interviews? Who has a veto, right? Who hasn't? Whose feedback are we taking into account, and who is just there for the fluffiness, let's meet each other? So even that, because you can't change everything, but you can control the things that you want to make sure that you have the right outcome. So if you tell me, hey, and the recruiter says, out of these 18 people, actually 2 of them are trained in how to be participants in interviews, then your answer is, well, you should look at those people's feedbacks and just sort of ignore the rest, unless there's a big red flag that 18 people are saying to you. But this is the lack of empathy that I was speaking about before. Imagine being yourself in a room of 18 people. The chances that you would be successful, or this would be a good experience for you, is slim to none.
Takes
So
a very
this is where,
particular type of
yeah.
person to sit there and go, yeah, I don't mind that. Because I personally would hate it.
No, I wouldn't survive that
No, I'd
either.
feel
I would
uncomfortable.
be, no way. No way. That would be a red flag for me to, sorry, company, whoever you are, if you want advice, ping me. But that would be a red flag for me to join the company themselves, right? 18
Yeah.
people need to tell me if I'm good for this role or not. No way.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, how you're explaining, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing the sense of this element of kind of relationship building, stakeholder, but more strategic relationship building. It is a skill that we can acquire, right? It's not something that's just written into our DNA. You said, and the phrase I'm kind of pointing back to is that you say you like people, so you feel more comfortable doing it. But ultimately, this should be a skill that we can learn. We can trace back where we're going wrong, and we can kind of unlock steps, as it were, to improve, right?
Yes, but one of the ways that that can be successful for you is if you remain who you are during this process.
Right.
Because if you go with it just blankly, I need to ask these questions, get these answers, I need to remind the hiring manager about that and the candidate about that, you'll get lost in the process. Because yes, it can be learned, but what you need to unlock within yourself is that social skill of reading the room, so verbal, non-verbal communication, right? And being able to be yourself, admit your mistakes, be empathetic. And empathy also can be built, right? Kids are not born with empathy, they build it throughout their lives, and so can we. And I think if people know that you're going at it with the right mindset, with a growth mindset, and for the success of the business, which sometimes people forget, I do not work for the hiring manager, I work for the company, right? The hiring manager, knock on wood, might not be there tomorrow, but I want to be there for the business. So this is always a very good place to start. Think about yourself as the owner of the business, and this probably is imprinted in my DNA, coming from 2 high growth startups, right? I think of these companies like I think that they're my own and I want them to succeed, right? So having that as the forefront for me is important. But the word strategic, I think, confuses a lot of people because they think strategy is quite complicated. I don't think it is. It's kind of, what do I want to achieve? In this case, in recruitment, is hiring good people for the company. How do I do that? By making a hiring manager trust me. And I'm not going to go in the details. I need to know sourcing, interviewing techniques, and whatnot. That let's say that's a given. But what do I want? I want this. Who is my biggest, let's say, not blocker, but who is either going to help me get this or block me into getting this? And that's the hiring manager and their team, right? Whoever's interviewing in the process. I need to make them trust me that I know what I'm doing, that I'm doing it for the good of the business and for their own good. And hopefully by the end of the process, it's going to be enjoyable for them as well. Because one of the things that we forget as recruiters is that it's daunting for hiring managers to interview as well. And this is part of being strategic with your process without over engineering it. If you learn who they are, you don't need to put in front of them more than 4 people, because 4 people is 4 hours of their time, plus writing feedback, plus following the process. If you increase that number to 10, they will not like you, and for a fair reason. So unless you get, and this is the most strategic advice I can give, if you don't get your hire in the 4 interviews, stop what you're doing, go back with your hiring manager, sit and figure out what you're missing. Because otherwise, you're wasting your time, 15 hours for an interview plus 15 hours of their time. That's 30 hours of time spent from actually adding value to the business in every other sense.
Has this changed dependent on the company you're actually in your opinion?
No. No, that was very categorical. But in essence,
Done. Question's over. Thanks. Move on.
It shouldn't. But definitely until you get your bearings in that company, right? And if you're a good recruiter, you're going to get your roles in any case. But if you really want to be a business partner to your hiring manager, to the company, to your team, to everyone, it takes some time. So give yourself grace, ask for feedback, ask for coaching, see. And this is another thing. And this is where I think talent acquisition can be extremely successful, is when you know who else to build relationships with in the business. And that's normally your HRBP. And having a partnership with them unlocks a lot of topics, because they have an amount of information that you need. You have another piece of the puzzle. Those two together, unstoppable force. Because there you can even, let's say, I'll bring a real life example. So I've been working with my colleague Senka for the past 5 years. She was the HRBP, I was the TA lead. And whenever I was recruiting, whatever I had to say honestly about the candidate, I would say to her, like, hey, I'm really sorry. This person will be difficult to deal with, but this is the best I could do with the market environment, the salary that we're giving, and my hiring manager. So I could prepare her to think about trainings, mentorship, coaching them to not make big messes, just little messes here, there, and everywhere. And that's another aspect of being strategic with your relationship building in the company.
You mentioned as well, and this is just circling back a little bit, you mentioned about not losing yourself. And for you to say something, it's clearly that you feel passionate, that you are who you are in work, in your processes, with your candidates, with your hiring managers, as you are at home with your family, right? It's clear you wouldn't necessarily bring that element. Okay, maybe not that relaxed, but you get what I mean, right?
I'm
if it's not,
stricter with my kids.
it's because the hiring managers are easy to get on with sometimes. So from yourself then, how have you managed to do that? Because you're absolutely right in the sense of lots and lots of TAs and recruiters just become almost like these zombies of
Yeah.
question, pitch, close, move on. And it just becomes like 8 hours a day of boring, horrible tasks that and it's just like it's not fun. And then they burn out, and then they leave the industry, and we have the cycle happen again. And then you have,
Absolutely.
I mean, I've done it 11 years now, so I feel like I'm kind of in that class of I'm getting into like the more mature category now because I've survived the 10-year mark. Um, but like you always have this churn of it. So how can we help those who may find themselves in a position of I'm sick to
Mm.
death of doing the same pitch day in day out and having no injection?
So there's a lot of aspects to it, and s- this made me laugh because normally, in order to combat that burnout, a lot of businesses think that they need to give the recruiters projects to deal with apart from hiring. And then that's another deadline you need to follow. There's another thing you need to do. And then we keep dumping things on recruiters and it just doesn't make sense, right? So there's two things. For companies that can do it, if your talent acquisition manager is solid, they can be a part of so many other departments. It is just insane. Marketing, sales, if they want to do it, the other parts of HR as well, operations, even strategy on some topics, or they can move completely to employer branding or other departments within the company because recruiters have a plethora of skills that people forget exist. But if you're someone who is stubborn enough, like you and me, and want to be in the business for quite a long time, right? How to protect yourself is to, at least for me, it came from my agency days. So that was the best way for me to figure out how to keep myself going because I really needed to build those relationships for those people to want to come back to me.
Mm,
And what I learned is I always like giving my candidates, I know this sounds controversial, but this is part of who I am and what I do, a little part of myself that I think they will enjoy. Like, I don't know, speaking about running or finding something common that they remember that I'm human and I remember that they're human. And for me, that's how I keep it real. Yes, I adjust my tone of voice. And as a, I'm going to go in a very feminist role right now. And as a woman, being, very direct or very, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone, can be thought of as bossy. So yes, you do need to adjust your tone of voice, but who you are and your ethics, you shouldn't. And if you see that in the current company that you're at, those are not appreciated, leave. You can always leave. And I think there's a big Stockholm syndrome, especially in Berlin and the startup scene, that you somehow, because you want to give so much to the startup, because there is that notion that we're all doing it together, right?
yeah.
But you can leave, you're not a tree. That's what, so who said, someone said that to me and I found it
I
like
don't know, but
shocking.
I love that phrase though. I do love that phrase.
You're not the tree, move. And I was
Yeah.
like, I was like, wow, that's
Wait, I'm
possible.
not a tree? All these years I thought I was. What's happened? I start
and
sprouting bits of tree that might leaves out my head now.
well, that happens to me when I go out running after my kids. So there's always little leaves in my hair. But I think that's the most important. And this is, recruiters forget to do that for themselves when they're finding a company. Find a place where they appreciate who you are, or a company that allows people to be themselves, right?
Mm.
Obviously within a controlled environment, right? And being professional at work, but also a place that is diverse enough by default and by design, not by employer branding strategy, that can allow you to be in that space as you are without asking you to do those, I need 10 questions and I want your feedback written like this. And that for me would be a red flag.
Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you running through this and spending some time, and thank you for like genuinely quite an honest discussion around kind of the topic of relationship building, because I think it's one of those where we all do it. We have to build relationships with candidates, with clients, with colleagues. You can't get away from it in our job. You can't just sit in a corner and not speak to anyone because we're always speaking to people. So
That would be lovely, no? Just one
some
day a
days,
week.
just some days,
One day a week.
headphones in, just don't talk to me. No,
Let
in
me
all
go back into my
seriousness,
HR cave.
I do appreciate, like I said, you sharing your knowledge, and I do really think that there's so much to uncover from this. And like I said, I hope whoever's been listening have a notes section on their phone, or I mean, I text my other half every time I'm listening to a podcast and I think something's interesting. I'll just text her, so I always go back to it from that. So if you do that instead, then like I said, I appreciate that. But if someone wants to continue the conversation, they want to learn more about you, they want to pick your brain further, where can they find you?
On LinkedIn, I'm quite responsive. I'm not in recruitment anymore, so if someone pings me for a job, I'll just redirect you to the talent acquisition team that we have, and they're amazing. But if anyone wants to learn more, I could be of service. That would be my absolute pleasure, because sharing knowledge is key in developing ourselves and keeping it real in the industry. And we're a good bunch of people at the end of the day.
I've noticed this, right, more so than ever before, not just since doing the podcast, but the willingness to share, to teach, to coach, and with no expectations behind it. I find it incredible. And I know lots of people. I mean, if I get into a different industry, you'd find it as well. But one thing that the talent community and HR in general, especially, like I said, I talk a lot about Berlin, but it's not just Berlin. You know, in the whole industry, by and large, people just want to help, and it's so good to be part of
Absolutely.
that. So I'll put your LinkedIn into the footnotes or comment sections of the podcast, and then obviously people can connect from there. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was lovely.
Perfect. Bye bye.
Bye.